On July 5th, 2019, at 11:54 p.m., Adrian Wojnarowski broke the internet when he reported that the Clippers were signing Kawhi Leonard and simultaneously trading for Paul George. What has that trade and signing amounted to? Zero championships. It has been 5 years since this duo was put together, and the Los Angeles Clippers have won nothing. But this might be the best year and the best chance that they've ever had.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry! With 0.6 of a second remaining.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Game Time. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to jump right into things here today. Now, today, we are talking about none other than the Los Angeles Clippers, the team that is becoming widely and quickly a favorite by most of the major media outlets to win the NBA championship this season. Now, the Clippers do sit currently at fourth in the Western Conference at 37-19, just behind Denver at 39-19, and behind OKC and Minnesota, both sitting at 40-17 respectively. The Clippers so far this season have been very good, especially since the James Harden trade, and we'll get to more of the on-the-court stuff and where I project this team to fall come playoff time, what I think they could do in the playoffs, and what matchups I do think favor them the most. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about some kind of breaking news for this team, as obviously we will see a Clippers rebrand going into next year. Now, obviously, the Clippers are getting a new stadium in Los Angeles, or I think right outside of Los Angeles is where Ballmer is building it, but they are getting a new stadium next season, and along with that, the Clippers have decided to rebrand and go away from what I think a lot of people look at the Clippers' most iconic jersey and most iconic era of basketball, as obviously they had the current jerseys back during the Lob City days with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and the rest of the crew, and they now had them when they signed Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and brought this team together. Now, I do think the best jersey they currently have is probably their black jersey, but I think the jersey, the logo, kind of the whole shebang has really defined who the Clippers are to a lot of fans, right? Obviously, when you think of the Clippers, you think of what they are currently as a modern team, whereas there's some teams where you can kind of think back and it's like, oh yeah, you remember like the Pacers when they had the pinstripes back in the day with Reggie Miller. You can think back to the Magic having very starkly different jerseys in the 90s or the early 2000s. Even the Raptors are obviously brought up a lot for their purple jerseys that they had back with Vince Carter and stuff like that. But I would say for the Clippers, this era of jerseys has been their most iconic, along with the logo and everything else. But I understand, right? I understand not only are you probably going to make a lot of money because, well, first off, if you win an NBA championship, I think this would probably be the first team in history to directly rebrand after winning an NBA championship. A lot of that is because they're moving arenas and kind of trying to set their own stamp on it, with obviously new ownership since the last rebrand, as Ballmer bought the team a few years back. But I do think, and I looked this up earlier before I started recording, I think this would be the first team to win an NBA championship or win a major sport championship, at least a major American sport. I don't know about elsewhere. When I looked it up, I didn't really specify American sports, but no teams came up as like, oh, they won a championship and immediately rebranded. The most that I could think of off the top of my head was like the Nuggets. We rebranded shortly before winning our championship. We kind of made some changes where we added red to the logo and kind of expanded the logo, slightly shifted the colors. We didn't go away from like, obviously it was after we'd gone away from like the baby blues, and we still had the dark blue, and we slightly rebranded from there. And that was a couple years prior to us winning the championship, not after. And then beyond that, like the Lakers have, or not the Lakers, obviously the Lakers have slightly touched up their logo throughout the years, along with the Celtics, but the Warriors was the team that I kind of thought of where like they slightly changed a little bit of the hue on like the yellow or the blue, and slightly changed how the bridge looks and stuff like that, and slightly changed their jerseys a little bit, obviously outside of like the city jerseys and stuff like that every single team has every single season new jerseys for, or the icon jerseys, more of the like away, the home and away jerseys is what I'm thinking of, that they've made slight changes to, but obviously nothing like starkly different. And they did make build a new arena as well, following their success over the last decade or so for the Warriors. But I do think it would be the first time in history that a team would potentially win a championship if the Clippers do win it this year, and then rebrand the next year. I think that'd be funny, and I also think it would be hilarious that the current logo is what would go in the history books. Like when you look back, just use 2K for example. If you look back at previous championships, I believe it still shows like the old logos for those teams, what they had at the time, or if you looked it up, like that's what I think it would show. So it is pretty funny to think of it like that, and that yes, you might be rebranding and spending all this money, but it's not going to be the logo that's in the history book. So I guess maybe for Ballmer, maybe he doesn't want to win it this year. No, I think he's way too much of a fan as an owner, and obviously there's too much money that he could make for winning it, that obviously he wants his team to do so, and they have a very good chance at it. I think that's an easy way to segue into the logo and everything that they are rebranding with. I like the jerseys that they are putting together. I think the jerseys they have now are pretty decent, and like I said, I like their black jersey the most, or the white one with the different font that they have on the lettering. I like that one as well. So I guess I have started to like their alternate jerseys more than their traditional ones. So at that point, it does make sense for a rebrand. But I do like the new jerseys that they're bringing in, and I'll throw some pictures up on the screen throughout. I'm sure you guys already saw some of the rebranding stuff in editing. But the thing that I really don't like is the logo. And they tried to say like, oh, it's a ship for the history of the Clippers and how a Clipper is a ship or something or the other. And the whole internet, including myself, was just like, what? I thought a Clipper was like referring to like a barbershop or something like that. Like nobody thought that this was in relation to some sort of like ship or something or the other. Like, and then they tried to explain that it was like the history of ships, and it's like, whoa, let's calm down here. Y'all started in Buffalo, then you moved the team and I believe the Clippers organization is the team that traded organizations. Like essentially the Celtics owners sold the Celtics to the Clippers, and the Clippers owners sold the Clippers, or what were formerly the Braves, to the Celtics owner, and then the old Celtics guy took them from Buffalo and moved them to San Diego, where I think he was from or something like that. And the guy that bought the Celtics, like, shout out to him. What a finesse, right? The dude used to own the Clippers and ended up with the Celtics, who were tied, or are they one? I think they're one ring behind the Lakers right now, because the Lakers won the championship with LeBron. So whatever, they're one of the most winning organizations in history, and instead on the other side you got the Clippers, right, which are notorious for not being a winning organization in basketball in the NBA, right? And so what a finesse by that guy. But he moves them to San Diego, which I guess you could say, like, yeah, San Diego is more of, when you think of San Diego, it's like a beachfront city. I've never been there personally, but I'm sure that aligns. I mean, it's in California, it's a popular city. It's obviously not going to be too far away from the shore. It's not going to be like Colorado, where you don't see any ocean. I'd be willing to bet. But yeah, and then the Clippers get moved from San Diego to Los Angeles. They are known as kind of the basement child to the Lakers until now, obviously moving out and kind of trying to set that new precedent and new future for the team and be a little bit different. So I could get trying to put that behind them. But yeah, I think the logo is absolutely ugly, and it just doesn't look like an NBA logo. Like, it looks like a European soccer logo. And NBA logos, the reason I'm saying it's like, NBA logos are super, super simple. We have the head of a deer as one of the logos. We have pickaxes as one of the logos. We have a bridge. Like, we don't have this, like, oh, you put a ship inside of a compass, inside of some letters with some circles around. Like, no, you're doing too much. You are doing too much for an NBA logo. And I think that's what's going to get the most backlash. I don't think I'll ever be used to it. Like, it'll be like 10 years down the line and they'll go to rebrand again and they'll be like, thank God they got rid of that ugly ass logo. And that's probably the way it's going to be, because I hope nobody else follows that trend of just weirdly, overly complex logos. Like, it felt like a team trying to explain why they have a city jersey with the whole ship thing inside of it or whatever. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if they just use Los Angeles Clippers more often than using their actual logo on things. But, like, I guess you go to like ESPN or see what games pops up and we'll show the two logos, and there's going to be a couple years where I'm just looking at that logo like, what the fuck is this team? Oh, yeah, it's the Clippers. Now we'll see if they win the championship, and obviously I think that's a very easy way to kind of segue into actual play on the court, where I do think they have a very good chance. And there's a reason that a lot of media outlets and a lot of high-ranking media personnel are starting to lean towards the Clippers winning the NBA championship, and against like a Denver Nuggets repeat or even a Boston Celtics winning the championship, when the Boston Celtics have 5 more wins than any other team in the association, right? So they are starkly above the rest of the league at this point as it goes for regular season success. And then obviously the Nuggets coming off of a championship. Any team coming off a championship has high odds and high expectations for them, though there hasn't been a repeat since the Kevin Durant Warriors, I believe, off the top of my head. So it has been a while since we've seen a repeat champion. hoping that we see it this year as a Nuggets fan. But for the Clippers, obviously you're hoping that it doesn't happen. Now again, you do sit fourth in the West, and you have fallen back a little bit from the pack where Minnesota, OKC, Denver, and the Clippers all sat at the same exact record just a couple weeks ago due to some losses to those teams, including Oklahoma City and Minnesota, along with some teams that are kind of right on your tail now in New Orleans, who is the 5th seed. They have fallen down in the standings a little bit, kind of been on one of their worst stretches to this point throughout the season, as they've kind of win and then lose, etc. For about the last 8 games at this point, most recently losing to the Sacramento Kings. They do have a chance to continue that streak and get a win here against the Lakers on the 28th, and their schedule isn't one of the hardest in the league for the rest of the season. Like, it's not like a top 5 schedule to close it out. You get to play teams like Chicago, teams like Houston, Washington. They don't, a couple of games against Portland, they don't play like the Pistons anymore, but again, they have another game against Washington, and we'll see how things kind of trickle out through the rest of the year and how standings affect things and how that could affect some playoff matchups and stuff like that here in a minute. But yeah, I think this team has been very good. They are 2nd in the league in three-point percentage, which has been huge for this team because when you have a guy like Westbrook coming off the bench and you have a guy like Zubac in the starting lineup, you're pretty much guaranteed 2 guys that are non-shooters in your lineup, or 1 guy at all times, essentially. And they've still been good. They've been one of the best teams percentage-wise from 3 to help keep that spacing. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George playing games this year has been huge for them. And then the biggest addition of the year, probably the biggest trade of the year, but the biggest change of the year, was the Paul George trade, that was a while ago, the James Harden trade at the start of the season, where we saw them bring him in from Philadelphia, obviously trade away some role players and stuff like that, and now you end up with him as your 3rd star, your 3rd leading scorer, your leader in assists. He's bought in defensively. Ty Lue has this team locked in and playing well, and they've gone on super long win streaks throughout the season, and they look like a very, very formidable team come playoff time. Now, the biggest thing there is obviously health. It always will be with the Clippers. If they're healthy, I think anybody thinks that they can win in any series. Now, yes, they could lose in those series, especially with how stacked the West is and what you're expecting to probably come out of the East, whether it's a Celtics, a Bucks, or maybe even like a Knicks or something like that. From just a Western Conference perspective, pretty much any series is going to be a tooth and nail battle, from a 1-8 matchup to a 4-5 matchup. It doesn't really matter. There are favorable matchups for every single team in that regard, and disadvantaged matchups to that same point. But I do think Kawhi Leonard and Paul George put you in any single series, along with the additional star talent on this team. If you're able to get some of prime Harden come playoff time, which I think has been a much of a rarity here, especially not only with the Clippers, but the last few years, as obviously I think starting about halfway through his Nets tenure, we started to really see the fall off of Harden, and not being the player that he was, but him being bought in defensively with the Clippers has been huge, and it has allowed them to be a very, very good defensive team, considering you have probably the 2 best 3-and-D wings in the game in Kawhi and Paul George, along with a bought-in defensive James Harden. Westbrook is always going to be a hustle guy. Zubac is good around the rim. You have decent role players coming off the bench for that regard as well, and it puts you in a position that you could win any game, you could win any series. Now, again, back to that, if you can get a couple prime James Harden games, where obviously in Houston he was, there was a lot of talk about, he doesn't get it done in the playoffs. Last year, he crumbled in the playoffs as well with the 76ers. I do think it will be something that is a narrative that's looked back on when he does retire, but maybe he can rise and help the Clippers do it. Say they get to the championship and he has a big closeout game for them. Say he somehow walks away with Finals MVP. That could all change for him narrative-wise. But I think to this point in his career, he's looked at as a playoff faller, not a playoff riser. And not only is this a chance for him to change that, but if he changes that, I don't see a team that can compete with a healthy Kawhi and Paul George, along with a near Houston level James Harden type of game. They would walk over any single team in the league, in my opinion, with that type of game. I don't think it'll come very often, but if they can get a couple out of him in some close series or something like that, that could be what changes it. And so I would look at him as the X factor compared to a Russell Westbrook, who has primarily been a bench role, only starting 10 of his 56 games to this point throughout the season, and averaging about 11 points and 5 assists per game, along with 5 rebounds. Now, we know he's a hustle guy. We know he stepped it up in the playoffs for this team last year. He came back on a nice and cheap contract for them to help and try to win a championship here in Los Angeles. I think some of that is that hometown discount, and finally realizing that he's kind of in that role player stage of his career, him being 35, all 4 of their star players being past 30 towards the end of their career, much more than towards the start of their career. And yeah, I think it's really just going to come down to, can Kawhi, Paul George, and the rest stay healthy and perform in the playoffs? As obviously we've seen this team blow 3-1 leads before with this same continuity. Now, that was when Doc Rivers was the coach, who has a little bit of a more notorious sense of doing that, as I think he has the most 3-1 leads blown as a coach in history. Now he does have a championship, and he does have one just about 2 decades ago with the Boston Celtics in 2008, and you can never take that away from him. But I think that Ty Lue is much more suited for this team. He's been a much better manager of star players, I would say, at least over the last 15 years, than Doc Rivers, as he was able to step in mid-season and help LeBron and the Cavs win a championship. He was able to kind of mitigate that relationship between Kyrie and Bron and etc., especially coming here with Kawhi, Paul George, and the just plethora of stars that they have on this team. You don't hear any negative stuff come out of this locker room, and it makes sense because Westbrook has been renowned as a teammate his entire career. I know I was watching the Numbers on the Board podcast, and I found out that he is literally the godfather to Kendrick Perkins' kids, which you would never think something like that. You'd think, oh, maybe with KD or whatever, and that's like the only falling out that you've ever seen from Westbrook, and that's because really what KD did was stab him in the back and left. He obviously left for the team that they were up against and lost to, right? And kind of stacked the deck against Westbrook. He goes on to win the MVP, etc. But he's been renowned as a teammate throughout his career. Nobody has really ever said anything bad about Kawhi Leonard, except for when he was dealing initially with his quad stuff in San Antonio. And I think a lot of them just didn't understand exactly how severe his injury was or whatever, especially if the staff was clearing him. But it was kind of one of those things. And I think, initially I was like, yo, dude, play. But also, as I began to understand the situation back then a little more, it was like one of those things where it's like, look, I'm the person that's injured. If I don't feel like I can play and there's something that you're not able to tell or whatever it is, like, I can't play. Like, there's something wrong with my knee, and there clearly was, and it's affected him all the way up till now. And, he just got questioned the other day in an interview, like, hey, Kawhi, what's the difference? Why are you playing more this year? And he was simply put it, he said, look, I don't have a torn ACL, and I don't have a torn meniscus this year. Like, that's why I'm playing more. Now, obviously, he put it in Kawhi Leonard terms, and very much like, hey, Kawhi, who are you? I'm Kawhi Leonard. Very much reminiscent of that interview. And so, yeah, I mean, Kawhi is always going to be Kawhi, and Paul George has also been healthier this season. I think what's been huge for them, again, is both of those stars being healthy, and obviously the James Harden addition has been big for them as well. I think an underrated part of this team, and probably the most underrated player on this team, would be Norman Powell. I don't think he probably gets the respect he deserves. He is the best three-point shooter on this team at 45%. He's the 4th highest scorer on this team at 13 points per game. Comes off the bench and plays super, super well with Westbrook. Obviously, him being the best shooter and Westbrook not necessarily being the best shooter. Actually, of guys that play major minutes in a lot of games on this team, he would probably rank, I think, as the worst shooter on the team. Only shooting 27% from 3 on about 2 attempts a game. So he keeps the other team honest, but he doesn't make them very often, right? And so I think Norman Powell and him have been great off the bench for this team. And this team projects to be very good come playoff time. Obviously, Terrence Mann's kind of your 5th starter along with Zubac, right? And yeah, I'm trying to think where I was going with that. But, Ty Lue emphasized before the season, like, hey, we need to prioritize the regular season. We need to not be a 7 seed fighting in the play-in or a 6 seed that's clearly doesn't have home court advantage. We saw how big that was for the Nuggets last year, and I think that is different because we are one of those teams that does truly have a home court advantage. I think like the Knicks have a home court advantage when it comes to the playoffs. Like, that whole arena is going to be Knicks fans, and it's going to be loud. I think you think back to the early OKC days, the young OKC days with KD, Harden, and Westbrook as well, and how loud the fans were there. And so there's some arenas that do have that, like, your fans are going to be so loud. And I do think the Nuggets arena gets pretty loud, and I think we might be underrated in that sense. I might be a little biased there, but obviously we have that altitude advantage, something that, yes, you can't really say for the Clippers. And the Clippers never have really technically had home court advantage being in the Lakers building, especially when they play the Lakers. A lot of other teams go there. It's very similar to how I would say the Raiders are for the NFL. but it's still, you don't have to travel as much. You can stay at your home. And there's just a big difference between playing 4 games at home and 4 games away. When you got to travel for that final game, a lot does change. I mean, at the end of the day, once you're on the court and you're playing basketball, but there is other factors that lead into stuff like that. And I do think that emphasis has clearly gone through to the players, and they've taken it well and tried to capitalize on that. And to this point, it's been very good. Now, like I said, they fell in the standings a little bit from where they were, being still a top 4 seed, but not necessarily in play necessarily for that number 1 seed anymore, though I think they'll still be fine with that. They will have home court advantage, at least in the first round, and that's probably the most important thing. Get you on a roll, stay healthy, and then go into the second round. Any sort of matchup is probably going to be a tough matchup for every single team in the playoffs. Right now, they would be slated to play the Pelicans, and the Pelicans are, I think, a pretty underrated team in the sense when we get to the playoffs. I mean, this team without Zion, and this was a couple years ago, but took a very healthy, high-seeded Phoenix Suns team, to 6 or 7, when CJ McCollum had played like 20 games for them, and it was Brandon Ingram, and they still pushed that. And I think Zion has been very good for them. They've started to really kind of find stuff that's worked with Zion at the point guard position, or not necessarily at the point guard position, but bringing the ball up as a point guard type of thing for them. And so they've started to find more success as the season's gone on. Phoenix is tied with them, so we could see a rematch of the Clippers versus Phoenix in the first round. And there's still a lot of movement that will happen as the Western Conference standings. And I mean, we could see Los Angeles fall all the way down to 7, I would say 7 or 8 at this point. We could still see them rise all the way up to the number 1 seed. A lot is still yet to be determined. I think that they will still have home court advantage, whatever it is, in the first round. But a lot, again, is still yet to be determined as for that goes. Again, they are the second best shooting or 3-point shooting team in the league this year, and I think that's shown along with being 5th in steals. This team creates turnovers and capitalizes off of them, and that makes sense based on their personnel. And I do think that some of that is going to translate very well when we get to playoff time, because as things shrink, as possessions get slower, if you're consistently hitting your 3-point shots at not taking them at a high clip, considering they're 20th in attempts, I do think that's going to be huge for them. And if you're consistently creating turnovers where you're getting 7.9 steals per game, then that's going to allow you to get easy buckets, get in a rhythm, and those 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 possessions in a game is really what's going to come down to change it when there's so many points scored, especially in modern basketball, and especially this year of all years. So yeah, I think this team has as good of a shot as anybody. They would not be my favorites to let alone win the championship or come out of the Western Conference right now. Right now, I'm still sticking with Denver, and there might be some bias there, but I think Denver's still been a little bit more consistent, and they still have that championship high that they're coming off of, obviously going for the repeat. Plus, I think from a matchup perspective, when you look at Los Angeles, they don't have an answer for Jokic, and yes, you can look at that and say, okay, well, who's going to guard PG and Kawhi? Because, yeah, you can throw KCP on James Harden, and that's going to be your best matchup. And, yeah, you can throw Aaron Gordon on one of them, but one of these superstar players is going to be against Jamal Murray or MPJ, and they're going to get cooked. And that's probably true. But I do think that I would still take Denver in a series matchup there. And at the end of the day, I think even if you would just go from a best player perspective, Denver will have the best player in the series. Denver would have more of a home court advantage when playing at home. Currently, Denver's the higher seed, and Denver has had more continuity as well. So I think that along with, you don't really have that health concern that you do for the Clippers, which I still think leaves an asterisk on any sort of playoff prediction, because it's like, okay, well, if this team doesn't have one of their star players, I'm probably not picking them versus another team in the Western Conference, because that's how deep the West is. I mean, there's a very real chance that a Sacramento could beat a Clippers in the first round because they play fast, they play loose, they don't have that health concern. They are playing with pretty much money ball, because last year, obviously, they make the playoffs and they pushed the Warriors, who were much better last year than they are this year, all the way to, 7 games where Curry has 50. And then this year, they're a little bit underrated. They've fallen in the standings more aligned with what a lot of people predicted as that kind of second year, people taking them seriously, but they are still a playoff team, and they could take down the Clippers in the first round. So I don't think there's any series that you're going to be able to take off in the Western Conference. I do think there's more favorable matchups. I think you'd want to see the Kings over some teams. You'd want to see the Pelicans. Same goes, I think, for OKC due to lack of experience, or even Minnesota due to lack of experience as well. So I do think there's some teams that you'd rather see if you are the Clippers, or just any team in the Western Conference. But as it goes from matchup-wise, I think The Clippers' number one thing that they want to see is probably a team that doesn't have that elite big man that the Nuggets do, because that is probably where they match up the worst. I think versus Phoenix, you really love your matchup versus Phoenix because you've got bought-in defensive players. You've got a guy you can put on KD. You've got a guy that you can put on Devin Booker. You've got a guy that you can put on Bradley Beal if James Harden continues to play the level of defense that he's played. And the rest of, like, you'll be able to run them off the court when the bench unit comes in, or when more of the bench players come in. Like, if it's just KD and Booker and Beal are sitting, and they also have dealt with probably the most health concerns in the league this year, beyond what the Clippers have dealt with, then you can run them off the court. Or even if you match up with a team like OKC, like, there's a lot of veterans. We talked about this team being past 30 for the majority of their star players, Ty Lue being a very experienced coach. And when you match up versus OKC, well, yes, Shea has made the playoffs, I think, 2 times in his career, once with OKC, once with the Clippers, his rookie season, and Lou Dort, I think, has more playoff experience, but beyond that, it's Gordon Hayward, who he just got traded to the team, and he hasn't had a lot of meaningful minutes for them yet, or meaningful minutes really since playing for Boston when he was making the playoffs. And beyond that, there's not really playoff experience on that team. Like, the team is very young. One of the best players on the team is a rookie. Though a sophomore rookie, he's a rookie. Or not a sophomore, a redshirt rookie? Yes, a redshirt rookie is the correct term there in chat. But yeah, I do think the Clippers, again, have one of the best chances to win it. I wouldn't put them as my favorite. Personally, if I had to rank it, they are definitely in the top 5, though, as contenders, and they are a clear contender on the inner circle with a chance to walk home with none other than the NBA championship this season. Now, I know I kind of rambled on a lot there. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of the new videos. I did want to ask at the end of the video, in case anybody's watching, do you guys like the intro that I'm putting at the start? So obviously I have the little snippet and then the intro after that. So I wanted to take a quick second here and just ask for some feedback on that, as obviously I kind of changed and added that in when I came back to posting the other day. If you guys haven't seen my recent videos, I do have 2 other videos up as well, and I will throw those as links in the description for you guys to go check out since I started posting again. And with all that said, hope you guys enjoyed. It's been your boy Dom from Game Time, and I will catch you all next time. Peace out, guys.
20 points, 14 rebounds, 3 steals, 3 blocks, 3 assists. Kawhi Leonard, who are you, man?
Kawhi Leonard.